time, weather, and
Audio Jungle.
Welcome to Old Fat Marine. Please check out the companion website, oldfatmarine.com. Every article has a matching video. Every video has a matching article. The topic I want to talk about today is a continuation of the last video where we discussed the Federal Reserve and how they do things that are basically illegal and how they get away with it. And today I would like to take the initial dive into the involvement of the Federal Reserve into each of the military conflicts the U.S. has been involved with. And let's take a look at World War I today. Specifically, World War I was started with a lie. For those of you that do not remember your American history or world history, World War I for the United States started with the sinking of the ocean liner Lusitania. The situation was organized and it was used by the federal government as an instigator to authorize the United States of America to enter the Great War. This is not meant to say anything negative about the vast numbers of soldiers and the citizens that served in the war. Quite the opposite. This little post, the article, is basically intended to reveal how the Federal Reserve has been involved in all conflicts since their charter in 1913. Let's look at how World War I was started with a lie. It all began in the early part of the 20th century between Britain and Germany. They were at war. American citizens at the time did not want anything to do with this war, and they were more than happy to sit on the sidelines. In the beginning, the United States watched from the sidelines, and the population was more than content to do so. Because in the United States, without the will of the people, you could not have any military involvement in Europe because the people just didn't want to be there. And so that wasn't going to happen because there was no will for the fight. On August 14th of 1914, President Woodrow Wilson formally proclaimed the neutrality of the United States. He had to say this because the mindset of the whole population at the time was, stay out of it. We don't got nothing to do with that crap over there. And unless he could somehow sway that opinion of the people to actually want to go fight in the war. In early February 1915, the German government announced unrestricted warfare against all ships that entered into the war zone around Britain. And actually in March of 1915, the Germans sank a U.S. merchant vessel named the William P. Fry. America was outraged. Germany issued a formal apology, but the United States really did nothing. Soon the Lusitania was in the German sights. That's the ship that we all remember from our childhood when they used to teach history, that the Lusitania. And soon the Lusitania was in German sights, but the Lusitania had been warned not to go there. The news outlets of the time have proclaimed over and over and over the warnings of being on a ship carrying munitions to Britain. The United States denied anything about shipping any armaments, and then they denied about the whole event. The United States of America continually proclaimed innocence and total denial of shipping munitions to Britain.
Is that, as it turns out, there were munitions in the belly of the Lusitania headed for the Allies.
The sinking of the Lusitania became the catalyst to get the people to want to go to war. You see, they kept telling the American people there was no weapons on the ship. It's safe. But all the while they knew there was weapons on the ship. Germans knew this too, which is why they warned the public, don't do it. But then the battle cry, remember the Lusitania, became popular as the citizens started to sign up to go fight for their patriotic war. You have to realize war is money. The first thing America has to do to go to war is to create a situation. It has to be one that angers the population and causes them to want to go to war.
And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
Without public support, any war effort would sputter and be ineffective. Once the people of the nation emotionally want to go to war, that is when the business of war begins. This is when the elites of society prosper. The bankers prospered much more during this time than any of the poor soldiers that met their fate face down in the mud. The bankers and their children rarely, if ever, put on a uniform and marched off to war. War was not for the intellectual class. And when a war is incited, it immediately has the need for more money to pay for the equipment, the training, the weapons, the bullets, the beans, the band-aids. In order to see the true beneficiaries of war, one only has to look no further than the Federal Reserve. The founding of the Federal Reserve in 1913 was when deficit spending started its ascent to today's dizzying amount. It must be remembered that during World War I, there was still gold in the calculation of the U.S. dollar. The year after the Federal Reserve took power, the world began the abandonment of gold as a standard. The years of 1870 to 1914 have been proclaimed to be, quote, the most perfect one ever created, unquote, referring to the use of the gold standard. It is interesting to note that within their first year in existence, the Federal Reserve was able to begin the slow crash of the U.S. dollar. Time to make the money. In order for the USA businesses to get involved in the war, the people have to want war.
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
The sinking of the Lusitania was just such a tool for the elites to use to rally the population. This is the same technique used in virtually every war America has been involved in. Future articles and videos will point out these moments in time. The business of war is very profitable for the Federal Reserve. Although war is profitable for all winning economies, the Federal Reserve has a special seat at the table of wealth. To this day, the only thing the Federal Reserve has to do is print the money. Since American money is fiat, it is made out of nothing. The owners of the Federal Reserve print worthless currency and then charge the people a fee to use that currency. These taxpayers even have to settle up with the federal government once a year to ensure the Fed is getting their cut. What the owners of the Fed do not seize in taxation is taken through inflation. And if you don't understand that, check out the previous video about how the media lies to us. War creates a lot of money. During the 1914 year, Americans wanted peace while Britain and Germany were killing each other's citizens by the thousands. America was neutral, and such the bankers in America were forced to sit on the sidelines. America declared it was going to remain neutral, and it was not going to choose sides. The U.S. publicly stated they would not ship any military equipment to the warring nations of either side. It was also said it would not enter the war, and the people of the USA were happy with that. The U.S. was going to remain neutral and act neutral. And when the Lusitania sailed in early May of 1915, German notes in the paper said, "Don't do it."
I triple dog dare ya!
It said if there's cargo on the ships, we're going to sink you. But yet, the American citizens blissfully boarded the ship, the Lusitania, reassured by their government that the ship was safe. And when the Germans sank the Lusitania, it began a public outcry of anger. The administration capitalized on this and confirmed it did not carry any military equipment. which has since been proven a lie because we have visited the Lusitania on the bottom of the ocean, because it's not really that deep. Aimless and faceless deaths were meaningless to them. It is rumored that Alfred Vanderbilt of the Vanderbilt fame was on the Lusitania so as the family could rid of him and his disruptive behavior. It has since been determined there were about 173 tons of war munitions bound for Britain on the Lusitania. World War I was started with a lie for America, and that lie began with the sinking of the Lusitania. This discussion is not meant to cast doubt on any issue other than the fact that the American people were lied to in order to anger them. The anger had to be great enough to want the public to buy in. There is no discussion here other than the issue of the lie as to why America entered the war. Immerse yourself into the time mentality of a young, patriotic 17-year-old boy, drinking all the propaganda of his time, the radio and newspapers spouting stories of innocence and glory. All of the public war sentiment shifted with time as the government messaging kept claiming innocence. The public opinion turned from separatism to wanting payback. Young men volunteered patriotically to sacrifice their life for the cause. Public sentiment was manipulated by the propaganda machine that spewed out American innocence and how the ship carried no weapons and that the people needed to be outraged. Soon the public was outraged, and the money that was spent, deficit spending, reached a never-before-seen amount. The Federal Reserve owners were printing money hand over fist. The wealth gained by the owners of the Federal Reserve was beyond belief, but unfortunately for them, the war ended. World War I was started with a lie. The owners of the Federal Reserve profited greatly in money and power. For those that got to stay home, war was a great thing. War is an event that benefits the owners of the Federal Reserve. This benefit is much more than most people realize. When you strip away the marching bands and patriotic flags, the truth is plain to see. World War I was started for the United States of America with a lie intentionally spread to inflame the American public. War is money, and World War I was the beginning of a pattern that continues to this day. The business of America is making money. The ability to make weapons is called the industrial military complex. This is a very lucrative business for a wide swath of corporations. The amount of currency exchanged today for weapons is staggering. More money is spent on weapons today than ever in human history. America leads the corporate charge more than any other nation by far. This video has two purposes. The first one is, I want you to realize the federal government lies to you. The second thing to realize is that the Federal Reserve is basically part of the government today. And the Federal Reserve is controlled by a privately owned bank, or a group of privately owned banks own the Federal Reserve. And the definition of it is a circular nonsense loop.
That's a catch! A catch! Sure, catch 22!
You try to research it, it'll keep leading back that, oh, it's both. It's private, it's federal. But the truth is, the people that pull the strings at the Federal Reserve are the ones who are benefiting greatly from the finances of the wars. Because you have to realize that every dollar that is spent during a war has to come from the Federal Reserve. So if you just realize that every dollar that is in existence today, basically the Federal Reserve has to receive interest on. because they're loaning us this money. And giving them all this money goes to the stockholders of the Federal Reserve and the owners of these banks. But you're not allowed to know who they are. And the second point that you really have to realize is that the federal government will lie to you and create a situation that will inflame the public to make them want to go to war. So the next time something pops up, just remember, the entire public of the United States was deceived in order to get them wanting to go to war. Think of all of the 250,000 teenage boys that went to fight the war in World War I under the pretense that a ship was sunk. Now, you could take away all the patriotic flags and you can take away all of the glory of winning. The narrative that started it was a lie. And if all of this matters, then why is the federal government so intent on perpetuating the lie of silver and gold being worthless? Well, that's a simple answer if you're paying attention. Silver and gold are a dull, boring investment simply because that's the way the government wants the people to believe. They want them to believe that all is fine, all is good, and there are no problems. Well, if you study history and you get beyond that World War I involvement for the United States was started with a lie perpetuated by the federal government, then you realize that what's happening is the entire degradation of the U.S. dollar. If you look at history, oh yeah, World War I was so long ago, don't worry about it. But it was a lie. And that's just the first conflict we're talking about in this series of videos. So the second lie is that the value of the dollar is gone down tremendously. So you should have learned that from the first video in this series. The media lies to us. So everything is a lie. All of it. The dollar is a lie. The reasons to go into the war are a lie. And the people who benefit the most are the owners of the Federal Reserve. So what I see coming is the devaluation of the dollar is going to throw the United States economy one day into the pile heap of all of the failed fiat currencies. You see it in the history. And the United States is not such a great nation that we will be able to beat this unless we end the Fed. So keep stacking your silver, keep stacking your gold, because eventually, I don't know when, eventually, could be today, could be tomorrow, could be in 10 years. Eventually, there'll be somebody in your life that will benefit from having a pile of gold or silver just stashed away somewhere. Can't go wrong. Keep stacking. Semper Fi.
Time, weather, and
Audio Jungle.
case.